I wanted to ask you before we sign off. So what terms do you use for yourself in your situation in terms of drug use? Is it just part of your past and you don't talk about it, or you don't associate? Do you call yourself recovered or in recovery? How do you describe yourself?
Well, I mean, I think because of this anonymous people thing and because people are coming out of the woodwork, so to speak, or whatever, a lot of people are coming out and saying, I'm in long-term recovery from addiction. They're sort of trying, people who are in 12-step programs are trying to respect the anonymity piece, the tradition of anonymity. And they're, instead of saying, you know, I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, or I'm a member of Narcotics Anonymous, I'm in 12-step recovery, they say I'm a person in long-term recovery from addiction or whatever. And I really found over time that that's really grown on me. It's really powerful to sort of help other people and say, hey, you know, anybody can turn their lives around and achieve or find themselves in long-term recovery. So I embraced it for a while as a way to help other people, for myself to sort of come out of the closet, so to speak, and say, like, I'm in long-term recovery from addiction. But more recently, I feel like there's so much animosity towards people who use the term being in recovery, who talk about being in recovery or being drug or alcohol free, that somehow they're causing harm to other people who choose not to go that route. And we talked about that in our last talk here, and it's really painful to be accused of like being somehow associated with causing harm to people because I'm somebody who's in long-term recovery. It's like the total opposite of what the intent is, to sort of come out of the closet and say, hey, you know, I'm in long-term recovery from addiction. It is possible. I'm a case example. You know, maybe I can give you hope. To have that turned around and say, actually, no, dude, you shouldn't come out and say you're in recovery, because when you do, or you talk about drug or alcohol-free lifestyle, you're actually harming those people that are not able to sort of achieve that standard. You're sort of promoting some sort of false gold standard. And I'm like, well, I don't have to talk about my recovery. It's fine. I'm fine being in recovery, or defining myself as somebody who's recovered or in recovery or used to use drugs a long time ago and doesn't anymore. Like, I don't really, if I can use it for benefit of other people, then I'll definitely say, like, yeah, I'm in recovery, or I used to use a lot of drugs and now I don't. But I don't want to do that if it's going to be interpreted as like me promoting an ideology or me harming people. That makes me sad.
I'm a pretty parsimonious guy, but I think that the idea that you can't define yourself the way you want to define yourself is bullshit. But can I ask you one more question? I know we're trying to keep it to a time, but I have one more curiosity. One of my favorite Seligman quotes, Martin Seligman from the University of Pennsylvania, it was something like, I always butcher this, but like when you're in bed thinking about what you want in life, you're not thinking about how to get from -3 to -2. You're thinking about how to get from 2 to 3. And I like that. That has always stuck with me. It's made me think about the idea of, I guess, recovery, as we would call it, for me, being something akin to having an optimistic outlook of the future, and an idea about how to do something meaningful or get ahead, rather than stewing on things that give me troubles. Do you find that changed my mind, I think, is what I'm trying to say to you. My problem, the only problem I've ever had with calling myself something like in recovery, and this is where my mind goes when I hear somebody saying that about themselves, is that they're thinking of themselves in their lives, or they're partly define themselves in terms of things that beset them rather than the things that they long for. Do you think that could be the case? Do you ever find that that's the case, or is there a workaround where you think of in recovery as something much more positive, something that you associate with its life building? Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, I mean that's you're touching on something that's could be considered somewhat complex, and that is it's basically a paradox. In that, if I don't think I would still not be using alcohol or drugs if I felt as though being in recovery was something that was like a hardship, and I was just trying to sort of stave off the sort of demons of addiction, and I have to sort of grin and bear it, and it's a slog every day to sort of stay and be in recovery. My addiction's doing push-ups in the corner, therefore I have to do this, that, or the other, or I'm doomed to sort of repeat the past. And I just don't see it that way for myself. I see being in recovery as being like the total opposite of that. It's like, it's super positive. It's the foundation upon which I can live the most limitless like best life ever. So it's totally different than feeling confined by it.
This is something more like, now I'm getting the idea that what you're really saying in tacitly is that you've now experienced something that you've been able to see that there's a sense of hell to run from, but also a sense of joy to run toward. You're in recovery, meaning I know the way of sorting myself out, and keeping the balance is something that's ongoing and forever. And there's no avoiding the fact that you could look back and that if you behaved in some certain ways that you could definitely slip into some sort of a hell or abyss or something of suffering. But there's also the idea that keeping your mind on the things that you want is going to get you ahead in life. Is that something more like what you're saying?
I think so.
Kind of a thing.
I think so. It's funny because there was a guy who I used to work with, a tennis pro here in Stowe, and I used to run a lot. I run a bunch of marathons. I used to be running all the time, and he would always say to me, Rick, what are you running from? What are you running from all the time, Rick? And I was like, Mike, what you should be asking me what am I running to? I'm running towards something. I'm not running from something. But I guess it's always a fine line, and I think it's really in the sort of the space between those two concepts of running towards and running from. It's that little space in between that if we can live in that space, there's like limitless freedom. It's not about being compulsed to sort of achieve something great in the future, or being terrified of some harm that could beset me from the past. Got to run from that monster. It's really that space in the middle, which is just like I'm doing it like this, like it's tiny, but it's like this huge, like infinite space, and it's very powerful to live there. I don't live there very often at all, but I would like to live there more often. That's for sure. Okay,
this is really seriously the last question, and I promise I'll shut up. Do you feel any fear that if you make certain moves that you're liable to go back to the place that you were in when you were in, before you were in recovery? I guess you would say while you were addicted to whatever you were addicted to.
Well, I know that from my experience with nicotine, speaking personally, I know that my experience with nicotine as a chemical, and the age at which I started, and the affinity I have for it. I don't, and I've had repeated experiences with this where I've not used nicotine for a while, and I don't know if it's just unique to the substance itself. I suspect it could be, but if I were to use it as a sort of a harbinger or an indicator of my brain chemistry, I would say that I am somebody who I know, like if I were to use nicotine now, 7 years after having no nicotine, I just really enjoy the experience of having nicotine in my system. So I would naturally want to use it very often, and I would. And I'd spend a lot of money on it, and I would be using it in sessions with people in my practice. And it's just not, I'd be always just consumed by, making sure there was enough of it in my system. I don't know if that would be the case if I used heroin or alcohol or hallucinogens or coke. I mean, I suspect that I would have the experience over time where it would eventually take me back to more regular use where it would be destructive. But would I arrest the process sooner because of everything that I've learned in over the last 27 years about myself and about addiction and mental health and relationships and stuff, maybe I would. Maybe it would start to go down that road at some point. Maybe it wouldn't. If it did, I'd stop myself soon. Maybe it could actually take me to places where I'm just not really interested at this point in my career in sort of taking that risk to see where it would go. Yeah.
That's a good tie-in to, I guess, next time that we talk.